Hello, I'm Michel Gagné, and you are listening to the Real-Time Visual Effects Podcast, where wizards reside.
You have a gift. You have a passion for creation. There's something inside you that wants to express itself, and that something has led you to explore the world of visual effects, a place where magic happens, and the only limitation is your imagination. All the greatest artists in the world started somewhere, learning and growing into the people they are today. You being here is the first step to building your legacy as an artist. Learn from the best and brightest in the real-time visual effects community. Sharpen your skills and be your best self. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 19 of the Real-Time Visual Effects Podcast. Today is an interview with Mr. Julian Love, famous for his Technical Artist Bootcamp, the VFX of Diablo 3 GDC talk. Julian works at Blizzard Entertainment and is currently the lead combat designer on the Diablo franchise for the Immortals, a mobile game coming out. This was such a great episode. We actually had to break it down into two different episodes. So this is part one of Julian's interview. With that said, let's dive in.
Here is your host, Travis McCallum.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to an exciting episode. Today, I have Julian Love, a senior combat designer over at Blizzard Entertainment, here to talk to us all about visual effects. Julian, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing pretty good. It's early for me, but actually early is good for getting my brain going. I'm best in the morning, so I'm pretty pumped about this.
You're in Orange County right now. How's the weather out there on a September?
It is unbearably hot. We are not used to 107 with 70% humidity here. That's not our normal. We don't know how to cope with rain, and we don't know how to cope with searing hot temperatures. We are only comfortable in the 70-degree zone.
Oh, goodness. Are you originally from Cali?
Yeah, I grew up here. I was born in 66 and spent maybe 30 years here before I left for Seattle for a few years, and then spent a few years in the Bay Area, and then ended up coming back. And so, yeah, most of my life I've spent here.
Okay. Julian, I want to jump into some of your awesome work that you've been doing over with the Diablo franchise, but I want to take a step back and really start at your humble beginnings in visual effects. How did you get started in the wonderful world of real-time visual effects?
Yeah, I had a kind of a circuitous route. I really started with 3D in the early 90s, and at that time it really felt like film was the way to take that and make a career out of it. I mean, I always had a toe in the water of VFX. I didn't really act on that, and it wasn't until I got into games that it became more of a real thing for me. So, in fact, it wasn't until Blizzard North. Blizzard North is really the actuation point. So what happened there was I was working on a secret project whose name I cannot still mention. And in this secret project, there was a guy with a gun and an animator, character artist animator who had animated it. And we had kind of the beginnings of the D3 VFX engine in that engine. And he put some smoke on the gun after it fired. And I looked at it and I saw that he had the smoke shrinking down as his way of fading it off. And I was like, oh, wait, smoke doesn't do that. We can't have that in the game. That's not how you do it, man. Charming, but I think I could do better. And so I asked him, hey, man, can I take a pass at your smoke there? And I think he said no. So I was like, I think I need to show there's some better ways to do this. So I got my own character to animate, and I put my own VFX on it. And then people said, whoa, that's better. Can you do my VFX? Because nobody really wanted to do VFX. It was like a chore that you had to do. You just wanted to make your characters, right? So fast forward about a year, the secret project closes down and the studio goes through some calamitous times because the Blizzard North founders left. And there was this moment where we were all sitting around during the reshuffling week of the projects. Nobody was working. We were all just wondering about the future of the studio. And I approached the art director knowing that we were all going to be working on what became D3. And I said, hey, man, can you just give me all of the VFX for this project? The way I was thinking about it was I'm being a douche because I might be pulling work away from other people right now. I don't know if this is okay. And he looked at it like, oh man, this guy wants to fall on his sword. He's trying to take a grenade for everybody by doing all the VFX. And we went through this funny conversation where He was like, no, man, you don't have to do that. And I was like, no, man, like I really want to do it. And then finally we were like, wait a minute, what are you saying? I said, no, I love VFX and I want to do them all. And I kind of don't want any of you guys to do them because it's clear that you don't love them. And he said, well, if you want them. I said, yeah, I want them all, like every single one. And he was like, deal. And that was it. I was in charge of VFX for Diablo 3 right then, right there. That's how it happened. That became my brand almost instantly. Instead of, even though I was the technical artist, I think everybody started to identify me as the VFX artist for the project.
Wow. That is so cool. I can't just possibly imagine a time when VFX was considered the thing you don't want to do. And now you've kind of like catapulted it to where like, hey, this is the cool fad. This is what you want to be doing. Like I always hear it from people how making these cool like explosions is like one of the coolest things you could possibly do as an artist. I'm curious, now that you've kind of spent some time in visual effects, how would you be defining it in your own terms? If somebody had never heard of visual effects before, how would you describe it to them?
Well, there's the way I would describe it to a person who has no idea what I'm doing. And then there's the way of defining it in my head as more of a professional, totally different. So the person on the street, I don't try to describe anything about what I'm actually doing. I just tell them, hey, when you play Diablo and monsters die in horrific ways and you see all that stuff? Yeah, that's me. That's what I do. I come up with ways for monsters to die. And most people say, oh, the animations. That's what everybody thinks that is. Yes, great. You understand. I'm not going to try to explain anything beyond that. You got the gist of it. But internally, actually, I've listened to other people actually answer this question, and I think they've given the answer that I give. And I do think it's a correct answer, which is it's defined by restrictions. I'm a little bothered by the answer now that I've spent time listening to everybody and thinking about it for the past week, which is I don't think I'm right. I'm obviously obsessed with being right. So I think VFX is lying. You're really good at it. It's more like being a magician. You're obviously what you want the audience to believe is nothing like what you're doing. And that's the magic, is making them believe it, which is a big lie. It's a big put on. And you're cheating all the time to make that happen, to create the illusion. And so I think that that's the fundamental artistry of the job, however it happens, whether it's in film or games. And the goal is to entertain. And I think VFX for games has one thing that distinguishes it from film truly. And I actually don't think it's tech. I think if you zoom out on the timeline, you can find places where one is ahead of the other or slightly behind or whatever. But if we pull back out and look at it, I think there's a convergence point that you can see where they're actually the same. And the one defining factor is that VFX for games is a language. It's a language that we use to communicate gameplay. And that really doesn't ever need to happen in film. That brings a very different discipline to real-time VFX that I think is a study that is multiple years of your life to acquire, a multitude of skills, actually, that a person needs to acquire in order to start to do that job.
Would you say that those transitioning from film visual effects into games can somehow transfer some of the things they've learned overward?
For sure. I think so. I'm sure there's a big adjustment period. Obviously, the restrictions and frame rate can be really frustrating, I think, for a person who's not used to having to deal with it. But, they have to deal with render times and things like that. So I don't think that's a big transition. And certainly, there are a lot of games where gameplay communication isn't that important or even a thing at all. And there's even in games where it is, there's lots of work where that's not important. But the closer you get to, for me, it's like the combat elements of the game or whatever the gameplay elements are. That's where this whole different line of thinking and restriction starts to show up. It has to inform actually more heavily on what you're doing than the artistry side of it. Otherwise, you're not making a good game.
That is such a great observation, Julian. And I 100% agree. Game visual effects is really pushing gameplay as one of the principles or core tenets of where a visual effects fit into it. Because the last thing you want to do is have the visual effect be the showstopper that steals the attention from the actual gameplay itself. And, the more and more time I spend kind of looking at visual effects across the game spectrum, I end up putting them in buckets. There's cinematic visual effects. There's ambient visual effects, which just kind of the environment. And then as you kind of specialize in, we look at character or combat kind of visual effects and stuff like that. And we'll jump into that in a little bit. But I want to think about maybe 20 years ago when you first started in visual effects and where you are today after you've amassed all this amazing knowledge. What are some things that you wish you'd known when starting out?
Well, I think the progression that I just alluded to is something that just naturally happened for me. And I don't find myself feeling like I wish I knew. I'm really happy with the discovery process there. And I don't think that there was something I wish I knew more about that. I actually think it's more on the career management, managerial side of things is where I think all of the big lessons are. Like, oh man, I wish I had been looking at my career through this lens. And so I don't know, there's a lot. 54, I've been doing this for 24 years. There's a lot for me to pick up and relate there. But I think I'm going to pick one, which is sage advice, let's call it. Which is like this. I think everyone expects they're going to work really hard. They're going to practice their skill. They're going to get really good at it. They're going to do a good job. And that is going to be the main thrust of their career trajectory, right? And I don't think that that's wrong. I think this is extremely important. If you're not doing that, I don't know what your plan is. However, I think that there's a blindness to that, which is the recognition of how important the people that you report to who end up being your champion in so many cases where you are not present, how important that actually ends up being to your career, how fortuitous that can be. And so to be specific, I know for a fact that there were people who just believed in me, for right or wrong, who opened so many doors for me in situations where I wasn't able to advocate for myself. And I know because people told me that they did. And I also am pretty sure that there must be dozens more who've done it, because people don't go around telling you, hey man, I kicked a door open for you. I put my career on the line for you. I mean, if they do, they probably want something from you, and it's kind of creepy. So it's not something that you would communicate to another person, but I'm sure it's happened because I've done it for others, right? Like I've put my career on the line for other people in a meeting that they weren't there to advocate for because I was their manager, and I didn't go tell them about it. And so what I'm kind of trying to get at here is that those relationships where what you think of as your brand and your value to the project or the company or the game or whatever, when that syncs up with the people who are empowered to advocate for you, your career just is like on a freight train, an unstoppable freight train. It just moves forward and you have all of these opportunities. And when you find yourself in a position where that's not the case, it really slows down. And no matter how good you are at your craft, it may not be good enough to circumvent that misalignment of values. And so what I'm saying here is I wish I knew was to pay more attention to those relationships and circumstances and do a better job of navigating them.
That's cool, man. That's cool. It also is a gentle reminder that we should treat everybody that we come in contact with respect and dignity and, kindness. We don't want to be burning bridges because you never know what opportunities lay ahead from us. So just make sure that, we're treating people like human beings and not, as you described it, possessions or objects that are going to get us ahead.
Yeah.
I want to ask about your own challenges and failures that you may have struggled with throughout your career. We always hear the story about the successes of, the Bill Gates or the Steve Jobs, but we never hear about kind of the struggles that visual effects artists or people in the games industry run into. And I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about some of those that you ran into and tell us like the lessons learned and how you kind of grew from those experiences.
Well, I mentioned big piles of stuff to draw on, and there's no pile bigger than this one. Good Lord. It's tough to pick one out. Okay, this one's a little on the personal side. So this was 2009. I'm the manager of the tech art department, and I'm running a team of rebellious misfits, and mostly people who did not slot into one discipline very well. And that's my fault. That's why I liked it. So there was a moment there where, a couple of my misfits really wanted to see a change made on the design side for the game. And we decided to have a meeting with the system designer who was in charge of that thing. I don't even remember the specific thing. The circumstance stands out, but not the specifics. And so we got into this meeting room, and what I started to notice was that first the designer started to talk and lay out what his goals were, which is that's a great way to start. We should all understand what they're trying to do. And I was just sitting back watching this. So this is where I'm in a phase probably don't do anything. I should just only do enough as the lead in the room. Just let them work it out. But I noticed that they started really attacking him, and they started cutting him off, and they weren't listening at all. And I was watching this behavior and thinking, this is not the behavior that I've been advocating. This is not how I want my department to function. This is not the relationship I want to have with the design department. This is not the relationship I have with this person or I have with my lead. At least I was thinking that way. Or like the game designer, Jay, we had a great relationship. And I'm like, this looks like the relationship is not good. And I don't like what I'm seeing. And I started thinking, well, why are they doing it? And first thought is, well, they're not being professional. And then it hit me like, no, wait a minute. They're doing it in front of me. I'm their lead. It's one thing to do this when I'm not around, but to do it in front of me means they must believe that I'm actually sanctioning their behavior. So they've gotten this from me. They've learned that this is okay. I've made this okay. I am at fault. I am the reason why they are behaving like this. And so I just blew my mind, and I was just so angry with myself. So I interrupted. I said, hold on, everybody. Stop. I said, thinking to myself, like, I have to demonstrate the way this is supposed to go. So I said, hey, designer guy, whose name I'm not going to mention, has a goal, and I want us to listen to that person's goals and understand them. And before we advocate our position. So let's all just stop and let this person speak. And then, of course, he laid out his position. And you know what? It turns out that his position wasn't really that far away at all from what the folks who were reporting to me wanted. And it turns out it really wasn't that big of a conflict. And it certainly didn't deserve the way that they were treating him. So the meeting wrapped up. But after that, I realized, like, this is really a result of me not having the best relationship with that designer, and that trickling down to my team. And it's my fault. And I need to stop everything that I'm doing and do a complete 180 on the relationship with this person and make sure that my team knows that that is never okay.
Wow. I'm listening to this really touching story, and what really kind of pulls out to me is the idea that communication is so important to have, and how you communicate is like super important, making others feel comfortable. And one of the things you mentioned is that the other people on your team were kind of talking down on him, kind of like ganging up on him, but they weren't taking the time to listen to him. No. And they were just focused on their agenda rather than letting him kind of share his side of the story. And your own personal feelings there, and kind of coming in and realizing that they are acting that way because you are allowing them to, and you stepping in there and making a change and finding a belief that you are following into. That's really, really powerful message to give, Julian. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry if I didn't clarify that correctly.
It's all right. It's something that's really stuck with me. And by the way, that designer and I work together quite frequently now, and we have a great relationship. And I credit that moment. I'm not crediting myself. I'm crediting the moment that there was a good thing that came out of that circumstance, which is I wasn't aware of how sour the relationship really was. And I remember asking him later, like, hey, I don't know if you remember that time. And he didn't see any of it the way I saw it. He was completely shocked that had occurred. But definitely our relationship strengthened a lot, and it made us like super powerful partners in everything that we've done since.
That's awesome, man. I want to ask about looking at the work of your own craft and then the visual effects of others that you see, whether they be on your team or whether they just be on ArtStation or in the community across the whole. As you kind of critique that, what are some things you're looking for that separate good visual effects from great?
There's all the what I would call the hard basics that I am absolutely going to drill in on, and kind of maybe ruthlessly. Because, when you do it this long, you can just see it all so easily. But that's, obviously, if it's combat, communicating the design, that has preoccupied my mind first and foremost for the last 7 years, much more so than any other thing. I've been all over that and trying to elevate that as a craft. So that's going to be there right up front. And then there's all the other hard basics, which are like timing. And for me, rhythm. I think those are not the same thing. Being a drummer, there's tempo, and then there's shape and groove. Those are concepts that we would have as musicians, and I bring those to the craft, and I think that they're basics to pay attention to. Then there's things like attention control and visual priority, within the special effect? What are we doing to manage all those things? So I think those are all things that, for the most part, are the basics that people expect to drill on. Shifting over, there's a whole other side of it that I want to look at, which is a little harder to pin down, which is the entertainment value. And I don't think that what I'm getting at here necessarily applies to all games equally, but it's a critical thing for a Diablo game, in my opinion, in that we are tapping into relatable fantasies. I've seen lots of great art that is executed far better than anything I've ever built, but because it's not a relatable fantasy, it's not something that we should put in a game like Diablo.
And can you expand on what you mean by relatable fantasy?
So this is keying off a little bit of that talk that I did, GDC, which is, if you make beautiful VFX, my thing is, describe to me what you think that is. And can you elevator pitch that to me quick enough for me to get it? Because if you can't, I think we have a problem. And I think the problem is likely that you don't know what you made. It looks great, but what is it? And so I think a big part of making a game like Diablo especially work is that you can't feel anything for a thing that you can't relate to necessarily. Well, I shouldn't say that. That's a little overstatement. You can't feel as much. You can feel something about abstract art, right? So that's where I've kind of overstated. But you can feel a lot more about a child being in danger, about a fireball, right? A thing that you know what it is, or it has some kind of hook in your mind. And that's what I think of as a relatable fantasy, is where it isn't just magic. So I kind of had a rule, and anybody who's worked for me knows, like, they've heard this to death, which is there's no just magic in Diablo. It's something. What is it? What are you making? Like, what is the audience supposed to get from this? So yeah, Necromancer has Blood Siphon. It's not just red stuff. It's the sideways tornado. Why? Because you get tornado. You get sideways tornado, right? That is a way more relatable fantasy than just stuff coming out of it. And so I want to drill on that really heavily and make sure that what we're putting on screen is something that the audience can immediately key on, even if they can't name it. Like, I don't think anybody looks at Siphon Blood and says that's a sideways tornado, but something in their mind is ticked off, right? And then they are keying in on that, and that's the hook. And so that's why I would focus on it.
Awesome, man. What are some trends that you're seeing out in the industry? What's got your curiosity?
I don't have a lot of control over this. I should say something about VFX here, and I don't have anything to say. I am really curious about all the stuff that's going on with like Houdini and all that. It is something that I want to dive into a little bit more, but obviously being a designer now, I find myself pulled in so many different directions. And so thoughts that I have are things like, it's like deep thoughts. I'm really struck by how just maybe 10 years ago, a big topic was all games are owned by big companies and they only make the same thing over and over. And hey, I made Diablo 3, so I'm guilty, right? I didn't make Diablo 3. That sounds like giving myself way too much credit there.
Is that ego coming in again?
Yeah, I was a part of that. So I'm late to the party here for sure, is that there's room for almost every kind of game that's ever been made has come back and been successful. Like, doesn't even matter how old it is. And there's room for it now. And I'm going to credit the indie market for really making that happen. There's effectively been a remake of one of my favorite ancient games, which is Wizardry. That's insane. Like, that was unthinkable 10 years ago. And that company made money doing it. So, but games like Children of Morta, survival games like Subnautica that are super high quality, but done by independent teams and just doing their thing their own way, making a super high quality box style game in a market that thinks that free to play is the only way to go in a lot of cases. So that gives me a lot of hope and makes me really excited about all of the opportunities for making games in the future and for independent studios starting up and making a more robust industry as a whole.
If we look at business across the board, because I have a lot of background in marketing, we call it kind of the long tail approach, where if you have some kind of project or genre or idea that you want to pitch out there, there's bound to be some kind of, interest in that area. But the thing is, you have to focus in and really kind of build up that one audience. And you're going to have a smaller piece of the pie, but you're going to get the evangelists, the advocates, the people that really get behind it. And, games that are kind of on my mind right now, Spellbreak just came out. Pantheon is that MMO EverQuest kind of, stuff. There are games out there that really kind of appeal to these niche audiences. And like you said, it doesn't have to be a AAA game to be successful. It doesn't have to be, owned by a big studio with like billions of dollars to be able to garner some kind of, happy reward.
Yeah, it's kind of an exciting time. I don't know if it's quite a golden age, but it feels like it.
I want to jump into some specifics on your work for visual effects, Julian. And to kind of start, can you talk to me about what your workflow for creating a new effect looks like from start to finish? And you can take a personal project or maybe something from Diablo, but how do you go about creating an effect?
Well, I don't get to do this very often anymore. Maybe one day again. But I don't think my process has changed very much, even with all the new gadgets and toys. So it kind of looks like this. So I'm going to definitely start on that thing that I left off with, which is I really want to make sure we're getting the best intersection of fantasy and mechanics. That's a spot where I feel like I live. I don't like to think of these things as completely independent, compartmentalized things. I can do it that way, but I don't like it. My brain wants to immediately solve them together. So lots of wild brainstorming, lots of bouncing things off of other people. I'd like to have partners who will argue with me about stuff so that we get the biggest pile of ideas and find one that we think is the best starting point. And then after that, we're looking for references. I want to spend time defining what I call the story. If it's a skill, there's a story. There's always a story, right? You don't just cast fireball. How does the fireball get made? Does it come from the character? Does it come from the sky? Do they pull it out of the air? Do they pull the heat out of the earth? What is the story where you get from not casting it to fireball smashing that monster in the face? Write that out. Know what that is. Be locked into that. Now we can start doing some bad whiteboard drawings because I can't draw my own name. Just to kind of work out if there are options and different ways we think we might do this. Just very quickly. Just cover a whiteboard in junk to try to arrive at what we think is the best staging, best thing to do for the camera. For a game like Diablo, obviously that's where I'm rooted. So combat stage is sort of the separator between workable and unworkable ideas. You have lots of great ideas that just don't work on that combat stage. So you have to work that out. Whiteboard's a great way to do it. Then I want to find out what my rhythm is, the shape and the groove of this whole thing, how I think it's going to be. My secret is that I will pound that rhythm out on my lap with my hands until I have identified whether or not the groove is going to be good. And I know that's annoying to everybody when I do it. I'm sorry, everybody, for having done that over the years. But then make some quick tech decisions and then dive in. Get it in the game. Get a roughed out version. Start playing it. Figure out. Well, you're doing what every designer is doing, which is learn all the ways in which you were wrong as soon as possible.
I just want to take a tangent and jump on your quirk about, being a drummer and really using that rhythm and groove going. I think everybody has something like that. And it really helps to pull out the potential of our creativity and to get our mind working and stuff. I had an advertising teacher who would go to class and take her shoes off and she'd walk around, the classroom. And it really got me thinking, like, when I'm at work, I don't like wearing shoes because having socks and being able to just feel the ground, it really opens up a lot of like creative thinking for me. So I think it's super amazing that you kind of find your groove through your drumming on your...
It helps me think, but it's also like I've had a lot of ideas and realized like, oh, wait, that doesn't sound good. So it's probably not going to feel good. So we should change something about it.
I'm curious, like from a timeline kind of perspective, like how much time should like an artist be spending on an effect? And I know it depends, but maybe you can give us some insight.
Well,
how do you know when it's done?
Oh God, I'm going to say I am super guilty of not defining very well how much time anything should take for my team and instead advocating for the whole team to just not pay attention to us, how long we're taking on anything. So yeah, I've gone toe-to-toe with many a producer and told them, I realize that this is in its 5th week, but I need you to relax and just pretend like everything's fine. And they don't like that answer. Nobody likes that answer. And I'm going to thank people like Nathan Lutzock right now for providing lots and lots of cover for my team on Diablo 3 to do that. So yeah, I do have a general idea of how long anything should take. These days, none of my thinking works out, but I kind of want to get to all the things that I just said. I want to get there in a day, at least, if not far, far faster than that. And then, depending on what it is, we kind of rate like skill effects on a scale of like 1 to 10, where 10 is like an ultimate, 1 and 2 is like a left click or a primary. Primary, you really shouldn't be spending a week on. If you're spending a week on a primary, design can thrash you quite a bit, but your art shouldn't be thrashed that much. If you haven't gotten there, there's something fundamentally wrong with the direction. Well, some of those steps that I talked about, you skipped one or something wasn't worked out. You really shouldn't have that kind of trouble. But something big, like an ultimate, that really can be a month, maybe multi-months, depending on what it is. Well, I forgot the second part of your question.
I think that was it. Yeah, that was
okay.
it. But I would like to know, what does a day in the life of Julian look like from sunrise to sunset, when you first wake up to when you go to bed?
Oh, this is going to be incredibly dull.
And it could be pre-pandemic or, right now.
I'm just going to go with right now. I don't think that they're that different. I do not like the pandemic. Nobody likes the pandemic, truly. But work from home is definitely for me. So I'm going to wake up as late as possible. That's always goal number one, because even though I think better in the morning, I don't want to wake up. And then it's, straight down for breakfast, which is going to include some kind of caffeine. And then probably watching Davey 504 or something about mountain bikes or a humorous cooking show, something to lighten things up. And then before, it's showers and then morning meetings, probably a good hour on Zoom these days, just gelling with the team and figuring out what it is I'm supposed to be doing that day. But then I'm going to move into looking at game content. These days, it's mostly about looking at encounters and judging those encounters. Like, are they fun? Are they challenging enough? Are they too easy? I got to play them against multiple classes. And then also, usually a lot of that is how they're visualized. We can have great mechanics, but when you don't visualize them well, it doesn't matter. So I'm usually going to record everything that I play and save those videos off and pull them into After Effects and then scrub them frame by frame to find out why they're bad. Everything that is wrong is found when you look at things at a slow speed, timing-wise, rhythm-wise, communication-wise, all that stuff. And then I'm going to start writing feedback, all my thoughts, what it's like to play it, what I see wrong from a design perspective, all the things that I saw that I think could be better communicatively or artistically. And then usually it's time for a break, and that means getting on my mountain bike. There's trails like a block away, and I'm going to go ride for a half hour just as a nice break in the middle of the day. When it's not 107, I get to do that. And then back at it for the rest of the afternoon. That's where I'm actually going to do the hardest work, which is paint overs. And my favorite thing to do is to take videos of the thing that's been built and chop it all up and After Effects the crap out of it to show like, hey, if your timing was like this and you made these changes, I'll even build some stuff and add it in there. Look at this as a suggestion. Like, here's how it could actually be. Sometimes it's just a lot easier to get across than trying to write it all out. Even though it's way harder on me to build it that way, I think VFX artists can look at that and instantly get what I'm trying to say. And that'll be most of the day until the evening. And then I want to probably spend some time in Ableton Live, Final Cut, doing some music or editing some video for my channel, and then finish off with some TV shows until I pass out.
You mentioned paint overs. I was just curious, can you tell us what paint overs are?
So it's sort of the same thing with the video, just less intense, where sometimes there's like, hey, you put a circle on the ground, and you want the player to move out of that. But then I turned on the cheat that shows me what the damage area is. And what I've discovered is the circle is smaller than the damage area. That's bad. So I'll take a screenshot of that, and then I'm going to paint over, like, here's how it should really be. Or maybe, hey, you didn't have these colors of these two things unified. I'm going to unify them and show you like what the difference is, A, B. A lot of the people that I'm directing are on the other side of the planet and do not speak our language. So anytime that I can say it visually, I'll usually do like your version on the left, my version on the right. The left side has a big red X. The right side has a big green check mark. And I've made the change to show you kind of what I'm getting at. And then they don't have to translate my terrible English.
That's cool, man. That's cool. So I want to jump on the topic of education here for a moment. I know you went to the University of California in Los Angeles. That's UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you graduated from a technical management program along with music and synthesis and artificial intelligence. I was wondering why that initial path and where was that big pivot into games from there? Can you kind of talk to us about your education?
Yeah, so I really didn't know what I wanted to do coming out of high school. I thought I was going to be a drummer. And then I got into a bunch of bands. I spent a lot of time in my teens playing. And what I discovered was I really love playing drums and I love playing out, but I did not like moving my drum set around. I hated it. And I thought, well, you can do this and hate that. That doesn't seem like a good life. So the other interest I had was synthesis. So what was this, 1988? What do you do to be a synthesis guy? There wasn't even a name for it at that time. So, but surprise, UCLA had an extension program where they did like a 2-year program where you could go learn everything about artificial intelligence for music and literally everything that was going on in synthesis. And I thought, well, all right, I'm just going to do that. And when I came out of that, I thought, well, I'm going to be a sound designer because I learned the term in the class. That's what I want to be for sure. But it didn't really work out because there was no internet. I did my best to try to figure out where do you work as a sound designer, and I literally found nothing. Probably in film would have been a place to do that, but I just never connected the dots. And then I ended up picking up art through, I'd always kind of been an artist of some way or another, and I actually wanted to be an animator at one point in my life, and then the computer just sort of made that possible for me. And from there, I ended up got my first art gig working for a phone book company, which I know it doesn't really qualify for the word art, but it's a great place to make a billion mistakes, right? Because it's the phone book and nobody cares. Nobody even looks.
What kind of art did you do for the phone book?
I think it was all print. So it was all illustrative. Like they had an ad, right? Like there's like a AAA plumbing. And they were like, well, we want a plumber guy. And usually they wanted their business to look like snazzy and upscale. And your job was to do something for that business. It lasted about a year before I ended up getting into, there was like the desktop publishing revolution of the late 80s, early 90s. And then I started working in print, which is like better than the phone book. You're actually working on real stuff with color, and Adobe Photoshop had come out and retouching became a thing. And I actually was a retoucher and worked in that industry for about 7 years. And this is really, I mentioned earlier, people who help you being important. And I got hooked up with an old time retoucher who used to work with like etching film. And he taught me color in a way that I think most people never, ever get the opportunity to learn it, which is how do you nail, like, here's your image, you've scanned it in. How can you be sure you're going to get exactly what he would call a 1% dot on a white point of this image because it's the Honda motorcycle catalog and they are going to come in and put a loop down on your film. And if it's not 1%, they're going to reject $50,000 of work and it'll be on us. Go. How do you do that? And I was like, okay, I'm intimidated, man. But he showed me how to do that. And I got to work under him for a few years. And it was a massive, massive learning experience. And I walked away from that career just like, man, I just have all of this like knowledge about how color really works. And I got to work on new art all the time, bad art and good art. And it was a great opportunity to just learn what made good or bad art. I did see like the end of this, which looked to me like automation. And I realized like, I don't think the print industry has a future. The internet kind of broke and you could just see the writing on the wall. And I was like, wow, how do I get ahead of this? How do I make sure I stay ahead of it? And I was doing 3D and I thought maybe that would be film again. That came back around for me. I ended up interviewing at Skywalker Ranch. Something about that industry struck me as being the same as print in that there's a creative who's in control and they don't work for you. They're outside. And then there's another person who decides when the press date is. And in their case, that's the film distributor. And they're unmovable. And you are in the middle and you take on all the stress and all the pressure. And I saw that and I thought, that's not really what I want. I want to be more creative. I think being creative was the way to escape this trap. And then I had an opportunity that came along, which was to come up and do work on temporary gig for Sierra Online.
When was this?
1996. 1996, I was in LA and my brother was working there and he said, yeah, we want to build a 3D casino. Now, at that time, Doom was the only 3D game I had seen. And I said, you mean like in a 3D engine? And he said, no, it's a sprite game. Well, I want to make it look like it is. He said, one dude who knows how to use 3D Max. But I told him what I wanted to build, which is like a Victorian style casino. And he said, dude, that's like 1 million polygons. It can't handle 1 million polygons. It'll never render. There's no way we can do that. So he said, could you do that? And I was like, I was using electric image in Form Z, which 1 million polygons is nothing. That's a silly cover. Now we're like, 1 million polygons, who cares? We just push that right through the card. But back then, you worried about rendering 1 million polygons. You worried about loading 1 million polygons. So I was like, yeah, I can handle it. No problem. And he said, all right, we're going to give you a contract. And I flew up to Seattle to do it. And it just worked out. And that got me into Sierra Online. That was my entryway.
What I love about this story here, because you graduated back in 1988, right?
Yeah.
And, it's a gradual process of learning and growing. Like, you didn't just jump straight into games immediately after getting out of school. You had to kind of find your way there. It's not a traditional path. And a lot of us are transitioning from other industries like marketing or retail or, the service industry or whatnot. And all of us have our own unique stories and journeys that kind of lead us here. But it does come through with a lot of hard work and perseverance and just kind of recognizing the opportunity and saying yes when it arrives.
For sure. Between the Sierra gig and the print gig, I had been doing 3D on the side, and I was acutely aware, if I wanted to do this for a living, how would I interview for it? Like, where's my portfolio? And so I would just invent work for myself. I would see an object and I would say, that looks really hard to model. All right. I just started just assigning myself jobs until I had just tons and tons of stuff. At that time, I don't think it was good art, but it would impress anybody who didn't, if you knew anything about 3D, you would look at that stuff and you could see I was doing work. And that even led to some side gigs where I did logos and stuff for people and a few paying jobs here or there. And I could say, yeah, look, I did work for a company. And that just made me look like I was way more capable than I think I really was.
And we hear that a lot, that back then in the early 2000s and kind of the 1990s, if you knew how to create, a square in Maya, then you got the job. But the standards have been heightened so much now. But that just kind of proves that there are new technologies constantly coming out. And if you, as a visual effects artist, want to get ahead of the competition and have a chance, learn those new technologies while they're still kind of in their beta alpha phases. That way, when people are like, does anybody know EmberGen? You can raise your hand and be like, oh, I do. And it's going to help you out so much.
Yeah. Advantages are advantages, period.
Many people believe that artificial intelligence or AI is changing the way that we interact and do work in the world. I was curious, what does this mean for you and me as visual effects artists? And where do you see the present and future of AI taking us?
I don't think my perspective is the most healthy one, but it definitely has been a big driver for me. And I'm going to take the scary side of it and umbrella artificial intelligence under automation, because I think that that's the first way that you end up feeling it as an effect on your career. Which is, are you going to lose your job because the computer shows up that does it? This is sort of what drove me out of the print industry because, that job, there was a lot of skill. But one of the things I recognized was that 90% of it was just making sure that the film was correct. And I had been writing software to help us not make mistakes. And one day I envisioned a piece of software that I realized could cut out 70% of my job. And I went, well, if I thought of this... surely somebody else has come up with a better version of it that doesn't work in AppleScript, right? So I was like, oh God, what am I doing? I need to get out of here really quick. And then that was the thought, which is, how do I stay ahead of this? This is going to show up everywhere. So what informs a lot of this is that when I got my first print gig, I got hired away 3 months later to another shop that wanted to start a desktop publishing department. They were all film and manual tape and razor blades. They had 30 people working there. They brought me in, and a year later, with 2 Macs and an image setter, one day I showed up to work and they were gone. I didn't know that this was the plan when they hired me. They never told me about it, the owners. But I just showed up and they were fired. And I was like, what happened? And they said, well, all of our business is now on the Mac. We don't need them. And I was like, okay, I did not expect that I was going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I did not sign up for that. And that really bugged me. But here's the thing was, wait a minute. That transition didn't happen gradually. It happened like lightning. Those people never saw it coming. What the F, right? It's always been a specter for me to be concerned about. It doesn't happen slowly. You won't necessarily see it. It's just going to one day. That's it. So how do we manage that? And so I've actually been thinking about that in terms of when I was managing tech artists, and I would say to them like, hey man, is rigging your only plan? Because I'm pretty sure, I don't know what the date is. I'm not going to put a date on it, but I'm just saying, everybody hates this. Everyone hates paying for it. Everyone hates waiting for it. You've written scripts yourself because you don't like it, right? I mean, you love it, but you don't love the mundaneness of it either. Everyone's working on this problem. Eventually, there's going to be an AI that does your job better than you can do it. And I really don't think that's a big stretch to imagine from where we're sitting right now. I don't think rigging should be your only plan. You should branch out a little bit. And it comes from that same fear, I think, that I have that of watching those guys all have their jobs obliterated and realizing there was no place in that industry for them to go. I'm being really dark about it, but I think that that's the most likely the first wave. And my message is diversify and look for opportunities always. Try to bring more value to the job than doing the job as described, because that's where I think it's going to take a lot longer for AI to catch up and eventually replace you.
Absolutely. I know on film, rotoscope is another area where they feel like AI is just going to take over and animate. One of the big pushes that we get is to diversify our skill set as artists in learning code, like Python, becoming very invaluable. And, you could argue for or against AI taking over, the stylized effects that we create by hand painting things, something that isn't procedurally easy to generate. But that's a battle for another day.
Yes.
Thanks everyone for listening to part 1 of Julian's interview. Come back next week for part 2, and we'll dive into even more awesome details, along with some mentorship tips on how we as artists and managers of artists can be better at what we do. He is just so smart. Before I go, I want to talk briefly about opportunities for you to get your work out there. I'm a big fan of looking at people's stuff on Twitter and ArtStation, and one of the big things that happens on Fridays is hashtag VFX Friday, where people get to show off their latest work in progress. Definitely share your awesome stuff you're making. Love to retweet, love to like, love to comment, and celebrate each other's work. VFX Fridays. Until next time, rock on.
Hello, I'm Michel Gagné, and you are listening to the Real-Time Visual Effects Podcast, where wizards reside.
You have a gift. You have a passion for creation. There's something inside you that wants to express itself, and that something has led you to explore the world of visual effects, a place where magic happens, and the only limitation is your imagination. All the greatest artists in the world started somewhere, learning and growing into the people they are today. You being here is the first step to building your legacy as an artist. Learn from the best and brightest in the real-time visual effects community. Sharpen your skills and be your best self. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Real-Time Visual Effects Podcast. We're continuing on with part 2 of Julian Love's interview. If you haven't had a chance to hear the first part, definitely look back to the last episode. And without further ado, let's dive in.
Here is your host, Travis McCallum.
Julian, before you became famous for your work at Blizzard, you did work at a game developer, Sierra Online, that like you mentioned earlier, and it's pretty well known for its adventure games like King's Quest and even Leisure Suit Larry. There was one game, I think it was called Hoyle Casino, and you worked on it as an artist. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience? What were some of the big lessons you learned early on that helped in your future success with Blizzard?
Probably the very first one was, man, the culture of games is so different than the culture of print. In print, everybody's really foul-mouthed and direct and honestly abusive. And I had spent 7 years in that. And so hopping into games up at Washington State, there was a big just adjustment to that. It was a good one. Like, spend too much time in that toxic environment and it really starts to affect you in a negative way. So I really had to just adjust to the new environment. But the other thing that I think was really cool about that, when I get to work on a sprite game, I think it's a really valuable thing to experience at some point in your career. It's a very different way of thinking about really everything about your job. So I think it was super invaluable. And then what we were doing was trying to mimic 3D with our sprites, which is even crazier. So I really treasure that. But also that the early time was like the team was 20 people and we would knock out a game every 9 months. You were an artist or you were an engineer. There weren't really even designer positions. The art director was the designer. And for casino games, that makes a lot of sense because you don't get to change the mechanics. You don't get to redesign blackjack, actually. So despite many people's attempts to do it, we're like, wait a minute. Nobody wants to play your crazy version of Hold'em, right? So that brings a great question, which is, well, then how do you make your version of casino better than everybody else's? Why is anybody going to buy yours? You're all making the same game. None of you can change it. What do you do? And the answer was focus on the entertainment value of everything. The buttons you press, the placing of the bets, the laying down of the cards. And this is why we wanted to make it look like it was 3D. We looked at every other game and it was like cards on a 255 green background, right? That's it. And the cards didn't even have rounded corners. They were just an approximation. And we thought, well, why don't we make it as much like the real thing as we can and just drench it in juicy entertainment value in any way we can. And that became the way our approach. And by the way, it worked. The first year of Coil Casino came out, we were in the top 10. We beat Warcraft a few months, which was like, wow, we made a casual game. It's going head to head with core games. That's pretty exciting. Now, here's the big thing though. I thought, well, this is great. But obviously, I wanted to move on after 6 years, and being such a Diablo player, I mean, that's all I was doing. Really, I was doing it more than I was working. I was playing nothing but D2. I was selling items, had a side business, was buying flat screen monitors with my money. It was just Diablo was my world. People said, you got to go work at Blizzard. What are you doing here? And I was like, yeah, you're right. So I applied and I got the gig. But here's the thing is I remember when they called me back to say, all right, we want to hire you. And I was talking to, I think it was Matt Householder, who was the lead producer. And I said, I'm surprised you guys picked me because I don't really have any core gaming experience. I only have these casual games. And he said, huh? He said, no, that's why we picked you. He said, Diablo's a casual game. It's not a core game. He goes, think about it. How long does it take to learn? How much do you have to know to restart it once you've left it, right? Like, how much attention do you need to pay to it? He says, it's totally a casual game. He says, nobody gets it. He's like, that's the secret. It's a casual game dressed up like a core game. He goes, and that's what your experience is. You're perfect. I was like, oh my God. I had never thought about it all that time that way. And it was a huge shocker that all of the experience at Sierra was somehow applicable directly to this core game that I was going to pick up and go work on.
That's so cool, man. It is so amazing to understand that no matter what kind of work you're doing, if you're doing something, it will eventually become relevant in ways that you may have never imagined. So thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. And really understand too that skills that we work in our day jobs, even if they're not games directly, like there are your hard skills, but there are also your soft skills. You're constantly learning how to be a better communicator, showing up at work on time, big thing there. There are so many places you can do to improve and to just kind of continue to evolve and become a better employee and in person across the board. Cool. I want to talk about kind of early pre-2010. I know VFX, as you kind of alluded to earlier, wasn't really considered a dedicated discipline in itself. So you, Julian, wore a lot of hats as a technical artist, managing all kinds of key elements like rigging and lighting. I was wondering if you could talk to me about those initial stages in developing Diablo 3, and how did you end up taking ownership of those parts of the project? And really, where did that beginning for your leadership development start?
So yeah, obviously I already covered the whole story of how I ended up being in charge of the VFX side. I think the backdrop of that, though, was that there was a lot of turmoil at Blizzard North, and with the founders leaving and projects being reset, and what we would think of at that time as Blizzard South trying to manage us remotely. And I would just say, I don't mean to be critical, but I think an honest assessment, Blizzard North just wasn't a very well-managed studio. It had a lot of great things going for it. It's one of my favorite times in the industry. It was extremely entertaining to work there. I had a lot of fun, and I really loved the people and the vibe, but it wasn't well-managed. And I think that it was kind of a struggle. And kind of my takeaway from that was I had been a manager for years in the print industry prior to that experience. And I'd even been a manager for a few years at Sierra. So I was kind of having the itch already, like, how can I, a tech artist guy, effectively have a position like that and start to affect this? Because I think I was wrong now looking back, but at the time, it's kind of Dunning-Kruger. You've done a little bit, you think you know a lot. And so I was like, yeah, I think I can affect this. I think I can make this better. I think I can be a better manager. And I think having better managers on this project would be a good thing. And what happened there was literally that when we reset the project and folded the studio and brought it down to Blizzard proper, there was sort of a need to rebuild the team. And Blizzard itself was a lot better managed. It really is a much better managed company. That's one of its secrets. And they knew that they needed to establish a management team. And I don't know why or what happened here, but one day I was just approached. Like, we've never had a lead technical artist, but we think we need one, and we want to start having it across the company. Would you want to be the lead technical artist for Diablo 3? That was like an instant yes. We'd already really formalized a lot of our pipelines for characters and VFX. Honestly, at that point, we had almost everything that we shipped with already in 2006. I think we were way out in front of the industry in that one way, in that we were already treating it like a pipeline, and we already had a full suite of tools, and we were already thinking about it very differently. We were thinking about it as the sixth character of the game. We cognizantly were going to put a lot of attention and focus into that presentation. So, I think that was just a lot of luck that I happened to be like sort of right there at the confluence of events. And I think my big takeaway here is a lot of people look at Project Turmoil and Chaos as a time to run, or a time to be afraid, a time to make desperate moves, or, oh my God, it's easy to panic when there's all that uncertainty. What I've kind of learned is if you just sort of hang in there, settle down, keep your eyes open, there's always opportunities in that chaos. And if you kind of look at that, you can see like D3 had some trouble at Blizzard North, and I ended up owning VFX. And then a couple of years later, we need leads, and I'm right there. And the opportunities sort of fell in my lap. And a lot of that is just from, steering the ship through the storm is the way I would put it.
For sure, man. And what they say, with great power or great ownership comes great responsibility. Thinking back to 2006, you really established yourself as a strong spokesperson for the Diablo team. And we know, as we mentioned earlier, your GDC Talk Technical Artist Bootcamp, the VFX of Diablo 3, was really famous for us as visual effects artists. Stepping in as a public speaker can be really intimidating, but you make it look so easy. So what's your secret to that success? How can artists really summon the courage to share their own, public persona with the world and, showcase their work to the masses?
If I'm making it look that easy, wow, I'm flattered. I am scared every time I do it. I am intimidated. I am nervous. So I don't know, I've got two things I think here. These are my things. They may not work for you, but they work really well for me. So one of them is prep. Anybody writes me and says, I loved your talk or whatever, and I really got a lot out of it. The way I thank them is say, it's great to hear that because it took so much work, and it's great to hear that work is paying off for somebody. So my rule of thumb is 80 hours of prep for 30 minutes of talking. I can tell when I'm listening to a talk at GDC and they haven't done 80 hours of prep. I can tell in 5 minutes. It just shows when you've prepped, you just have a solid talk. It forces you to re-examine what you even thought you were going to talk about sometimes. And I've gone into, I'm going to talk about this, and here's what I think I'm going to say. And I think that, and I got halfway through it, and I realized I didn't really understand it as well as I thought it did. And I don't understand it well enough to teach it to anybody. And I really need to think more about this. And the next thing you know, what seemed like a week's worth of work turns into 4 as I'm re-examining my whole position. And that's super valuable for me, but also means that my talk is going to be better. So yeah, I think that prep for me looks like, I don't know, 10% of that time is ideation and roughing out what I'm going to say. 60% of it is in deck building and iteration. I'm going to rebuild that deck so many times. And then the last remaining is a rehearsal and then changing the deck again, like probably 8, 9 times as I try to go from I don't write the way I talk. And when I get there, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going to say. It comes out terrible. And so I have to go through this process of, this is how I'm comfortable saying it. And now I'm going to rewrite the deck to fit the way I'm going to perform it. And that is the way I look at it, is the performance. Mm-hmm. And I have to be comfortable on stage performing it. And so whatever I have to do to that deck to get there, that's what gets done. I do crazy things. 5 minutes before I went on stage, I cut a slide. And the reason why I cut the slide was I will only practice in the last 24 hours the first slide to get my timing down. Because if your timing in your first slide's good, timing for the rest of the talk is nailed. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't get it down to the minute that I wanted. It was a minute and a half. And I thought, all right, if it's a minute and a half, then I have too many slides. I'm cutting a slide. I think the talk got better because I cut that slide. So the other side of it is this, managing energy. People are afraid. Well, one, hey, if you're prepped that well, you're going to be a little less nervous, right? Whereas if you're going on stage and you haven't prepped well, you're like, uh-oh. But the thing is, I lucked out. At an early age, I was playing drums at 12. I was in a band by 15. The first gig I got was this party in the middle of winter, and it was 35 degrees at night, which is cold for California. And I remember before ready to go on stage, I hadn't thought about playing in front of people at all. I just thought it's going to be fun. And I saw the people out there at the party, and I was like, oh, God, that's what I'm doing? I didn't imagine this. I was immediately mortified. But also, I went out to check my kit, and it was so cold, my hands were freezing up. Mm-hmm. I was literally taking cold damage. I was CC'd by the weather. And I'm like, I can't play with stiff hands. I ran back in. I'm like 15, right? And I'm talking to the band members who were older than me. They were all 5 years older than me. And I said, hey, we have this problem. And they said, oh, no, you'll be fine once you start playing. You're a drummer. It's like exercise. I said, but how do I get there? Right now, I think the sticks are going to fly out of my hands. They said, oh, we got to warm up. Start doing jumping jacks. The next thing, I'm like, all right, this is completely obliterating my rock star fantasy because I'm doing 4-count burpees in the living room of this house to try to warm up. But it worked. But here's the thing I discovered. It didn't just solve my hand freezing problem. All that nervous energy went somewhere, and it went into kinetic energy. It went into performance energy. It went into moving my body around. And I realized, like, oh, you can totally redirect nervous energy into performance energy. But you got to do it. It's a muscle. It's a skill. You have to apply this, and you have to work on it. And so when I'm backstage at BlizzCon, and there's a roar of 20,000 people, that's scary. Trust me, I don't care who you are. That's frightening. There's TV cameras. You're going to talk to like 100,000 people. What the F? Why am I here, right? And so move around, jump up and down, get that energy moving in the right direction. And then when you walk out on stage, A, that energy went somewhere. It's not bottled up. But 2, you're also prepped to move, right? Your body is used to moving as a solution to the problem. And so I hate podiums. I don't like standing behind them. I'm terrible that way. But if I can get out and I can move my body, everything just settles down and the performance comes out.
That's awesome, man. That's good advice. Thanks for sharing. In addition to being an awesome public speaker, I know that you also educate others in the craft of video games and visual effects. I was wondering if you could just talk about some of your experience being an educator, maybe some tips that you can share when mentoring others, and also for those wanting to find mentors and be mentored.
Yeah, I don't know where this really came from. I think it was just, in learning how to do the on-stage stuff. I think I realized how much I get out of it. For me, it's super awesome to help other people. Like, don't get me wrong, but there's also a selfish side of it, which is you think you know something well enough to teach somebody. Wait until you try to actually do it, you'll walk out of that like knowing it so much better. You will always learn like so much more in that attempt. And I think I kind of got hooked on it that way. And so it's hard for me to say what works for anyone else. I just know that for me, it's seeing it as that double win. Like, I'm going to positively impact these people. I'm going to help grow a person's career potentially. But I'm also going to put myself through like the gauntlet in terms of my thinking on this. And I'm going to come out of it so much better. So what's not to like? Even though it's hard work, it always feels like it's worth it. And that's my angle on doing it. And then I think on the other side, I probably have a harder time like getting across like how to find a mentor. I think Rachel touched on this in her interview, which is nobody really contacts me. I think I'm probably very intimidating, and contacting a person who works at Blizzard for new people would probably be even more intimidating. Some people do it though. They reach out to me, and whenever they do and they've got something they want me to look at, I give them my time. If you contact me, I'm going to give you my time. I'm going to look at your stuff. I'm going to give you the same feedback that I would if you were on my team and we were working together. Exactly. In all of its ungentleness, you get it all. But it's all going to be very useful, and I'm happy to do it. And I'm surprised how few people take advantage of that. It's not their fault. I haven't advertised it. I don't hang out in groups and stuff, so I'm not terribly visible. But yeah, if more people did that, I think they would find that there's a lot of people like me out there who will give you their time.
I feel like a lot of times, because you're not face-to-face with these people, sometimes you don't even know how to get in contact with them. And I know at least with video game developers, it's really hard to get their contact information. So it's not like I can just find Julian Love's email address and be like, hey, take a look at my work. You really kind of got to dig. And I know for me and you, we connected on LinkedIn, but a lot of artists don't really use LinkedIn. It's more of a business kind of like area.
I agree. I'm going to say 90% of the people who contact me, it's been LinkedIn. Occasionally, they'll send something to my Blizzard email address. They'll just guess it, I guess, like figure it out. But most of it's been LinkedIn contacts, yeah.
I know that you've been at Blizzard for well over 10 years, and you've been directing not just the VFX of Diablo, but also other game design areas like combat and the class systems. And even now, in the upcoming release of Diablo 4 and Immortal, you've shifted your attention to combat design. Why the change?
Oh, yeah. I have some explaining to do. I'm going to say I never really had a foot out of design. Even when I started at Blizzard North as a technical artist, one of the things I noticed was they were preparing a patch, the 110 patch for D2, and nobody there wanted to play test it. There was the guy working on it, and everyone else just couldn't be bothered. They were just sick of Diablo. It was such a death march for them. And I was like, what? I'm playing Diablo right now. At that time, it's D2. And I'm like, I'll test it. And I remember getting into that. That led to me being able to work on the design of that patch. And I was like, this is great. And by the way, Blizzard North didn't care. They didn't care like what your title was. You work on a design? Everybody works on design. It's fine. So I always had like a foot in it. But there have been times when I felt the opposite pull. And so this is what I want to get into is that with size of an organization comes structure of some kind. Even those companies that say they don't have a structure have a structure. Like everybody has a structure. You kind of end up having to adopt it in some way. And the dominant structure in our industry starts by dividing people up by discipline. And when you do that, like the downside of that, well, you get organization, but you create gaps and territories and this notion of, well, which one are you? Right? Which box do you fit in? And once your title can become your brand without you realizing it. And I started to feel that at Blizzard North even right away as I got there and I was doing some design work. And somebody said to me one day, well, yeah, but you're just a tech artist. And I was like, oh God, that is not the right thing to say to me. Mm-hmm. Like oh God, no, that's not it. Nobody ever said that to me at Sierra, right? Nobody cared. And I didn't think that the founders of Blizzard North seemed to care. They were happy to have me work on it. Why does this individual care? And it just got in me really hard. And I do think that that's why I built kind of a rebellious tech art team. Our job was to bust down doors. I was going to bust down doors. I was going to make things possible for anything that people wanted to do on my team. But I know I'm really rambled on here, but this thing meant that I never really lost sight of wanting to design. And Jay Wilson, who was the game director, just sort of made it okay for me again. And I had been doing it for so long, and I became aware that my brand was technical artist or VFX artist. But what I was actually doing was spending 50% of my time at least actually designing. I actually have a ton of class designs in Diablo 3, but nobody knows because my title says otherwise, right? And I recognize that this is a big problem, that I live in the space between two disciplines, and I am the most powerful there. If you are not getting those things from me, you are wasting money. And I am unhappy because I feel underutilized. And this finally came to a head at some point, maybe about 4 years ago, where they started to say, well, look, if you want to do design, you have to give up art. And there's some sense in that. You know, you don't get to do it all. You have to make time. But it felt like cutting off the left arm for the right arm to grow. But eventually it got to a point where the only way for me to keep on going down the design road was to give it up. That's where the change came. But now on Immortal, it's all come back around because I kind of get to do both because it's a small team.
Yeah, man. And I'm glad you mentioned like small team versus kind of like big company. We see this across businesses across the board where when you're in these kind of like startup environments, they do want these unicorns or these like generalists who can do it all. They get more bang for their buck. But as you kind of move into these bigger companies, it is very hard, if not impossible, for a generalist to be able to get in. And they want you to specialize. So now you have to kind of zero in all your skills in one area. There's both like a beauty in being a human being where we are malleable and we can change our pathways and stuff. And I think it works really great when you're in the industry, when you're finally in a company, you can move around. Maybe you want to start learning about animation so you can pick your coworkers' brains and move over there. But first getting your foot in the door, you really have to kind of zero in on one particular thing.
I don't mean to knock specialization either. There's lots of people who do that, and there's nothing wrong with it. I'm saying there's something wrong with me in that my brain just didn't ever work that way. I never saw myself as purely one thing or the other, and I never thought that I was better at either job because of the specialization. So I think I'm an odd duck, and I think I have a hard time fitting in large team structures because of it.
You're also a drummer. Don't forget that.
Yes. You need to get that too.
Do you got a drum set in your house at least? You still
Not currently. I used to. We downsized a few years back, and I used to have a studio in my garage, and I could play anytime I wanted, and it was amazing. But for the last 2 years, I've had to go without. And at some point, I'm going to reach a place where I can't stand that anymore either, and I have to do something about it.
I feel like every artist has an instrument that really kind of speaks to them. For me, it's the piano. I was just watching La La Land, my favorite movie of all time. And I was like, man, I really want to get a piano so I can play some of those tunes. But wait until I get my mansion, right?
Yeah. Mansion solves a lot.
Oh, Julian, you have gained a lot of trust and respect within the games industry, as we all know. And you pulled off some amazing stuff with the Diablo franchise. And also, you've pulled away from it to help out with other projects in a managerial role. For those VFX supervisors and leads looking to better manage their team and really set them up for their road to success, what advice do you have for those leads and managers?
There's a lot of books out there who want to tell you how to be a manager, and I'm not saying that any of them are wrong. They all actually have pieces of advice in them that are really salient and worth paying attention to. But I kind of learned a thing along the way, which was actually by my younger brother is a sculptor. And I watched him grow from starting out to where he is today. Now he's a very famous sculptor who's worked in the movie industry and now works at Sideshow Collectibles. And when I first came into his studio, he had like all these tools. He had a wall of tools. And he's like, oh, I use this tool for that, and this tool for that, and this tool for that. And at that time I could relate, as I thought as a manager, I'm like collecting all of these tools. Like I've got DISC, I've got Myers-Briggs, I've got motivators, I've learned the 7 habits, and those were all worth learning. And there's just a sea. How do you get it all? I need all of the tools, right? And then, 8 years later, I watched him sculpt, and he has 3 tools, like a little pick thing and this other thing in his hands, and that's it. That's all he uses. The whole wall of tools is gone. He only uses 3 tools to sculpt everything. I was like, whoa, what the hell? What I can tell you today is you don't really need all those tools. What you need is the understanding of what your job actually is. And then whatever tools make sense to do this job is what you're going to use. And pick the ones that work for you. But the job is you need to help other people understand how to succeed on their own. How can they work completely autonomously from you as the lead and succeed every day, progress their careers, and help make the project awesome? And you will know when you have done it well, when you decide at the last minute on the busiest week of your schedule, when you're booked in tons of meetings, to just take the week off. And when you come back, nothing stopped. No one said we couldn't do a thing because you weren't there, because your team picked it all up and they took over. And it was like you weren't missed at all. In fact, it felt like you weren't even necessary. On that day, you have done your job well. And until that day, you have a lot of work to do.
Julian, are you ready to get into the lightning round? VFX questions, just as easy as it is to create VFX.
Sure, yeah, lightning round sounds good. Hopefully I can ramble less.
What is a perfect one-day getaway in Orange County and the surrounding area?
Oh my God, promise broken. For me, no, this is really quick. I'm a big mountain biker. We know that now. It's established. I will drive up to the San Bernardino Mountains usually, or maybe out to Palm Springs, some crazy place that's nearby. And I'm going to do a 30 to 40 mile all day descent, point to point on my mountain bike, hopefully on all backcountry single track trails where if everything goes well, I'm not going to run into a single person. And then calamities are going to happen and it's going to be a big adventure. And that's really what I'm looking for. And then after that, I don't know, maybe stop at A&W and get a root beer float because I earned it by burning 4,000 calories, and then after that, I don't care because I'm too tired. But yeah, that's absolutely my favorite thing to do. Any day I can do it.
What video game or app are you using on your phone that is the most fun?
I don't do a lot of app stuff. I mean, look, I get to play Immortal anytime I want right now. And because I'm working on it and nobody else gets to play that yet. But that's really more work and not fun. It's fun as it is. It's still work. Trailforks is an app that I use a lot because when you are going to go into the backcountry, by the way, Trailforks is an app that has satellite info and trail info of every trail, and it's crowdsourced, so people are constantly adding to it. So I always do a lot of research because if I am going to go into the backcountry, you don't get to just stop when you are 30 miles away from civilization on a single track trail that you haven't seen a single soul on. There's no get off button. You have to get to the end yourself, usually. It's either that or you press the helicopter button on your sat nav device, right? Which is expensive. I don't want that. Nobody wants that. So research. So I'm constantly on Trailforks looking at ways to do different things, looking for different routes and stuff. And I don't think there's a day that goes by that I'm not looking at that.
What is your favorite thing to cook or eat?
A thing that I combined two things that I know some people are going to be horrified to hear. I love yellow curry. I love curry in general. It's maybe my favorite food thing. I do like meat. And so I would like to get a ribeye and then stir fry it with yellow curry. And I know that's blasphemy for ribeye eaters, but having good meat in your curry does make it better, in my opinion. So that's my favorite thing.
Is there a favorite restaurant nearby that you frequent, or do you do a lot of home-cooked meals?
My wife doesn't really like to eat out that much. There's a Mexican place nearby that I usually get food from once a week because it's just exceptional. But these days, I'm not into cooking that much. But because my wife doesn't like to eat out and I love curry, that means I have to make it. So I've had to kind of force myself to learn how to do some of these things in order to have them.
What is your favorite book or podcast you've listened to recently?
I'm kind of a phasey reader. I'm in a phase and I read a lot, or I'm not in the phase and I don't. I can't make myself do it either. I have no control over that. So right now I've been in a no reading phase for quite a while. But when I am, it's fantasy or horror that I would like to read. I also don't listen to podcasts much. And this is because I know why, because I took a test and they told me why. It's because I'm a visual learner and like spoken word audio is my least favorite way to learn. I have listened to a bunch of the podcasts and I've enjoyed them. And so yours is the only one. But I had to set aside time and really sit and listen. I will lose track. It'll just go by if it's in the background. I can't listen to it while I work. I have to actually focus on it.
Yeah, and now that you're not commuting to work, you don't have a reason to turn on the radio. It's typically like where a lot of people listen to podcasts nowadays.
That would solve that for me. Yeah, not driving.
Favorite video game visual effect you're jealous of that isn't your own?
Oh, this is easy. Lucy's fireball from Children of Morta. Oh my God, whoever did that, I don't know your name. You are awesome. You made me so happy. I only want to play that character. It looks great and it feels so good. I just can't stop pressing the button. And that is my litmus test for something that is done well, is it just makes you want to press the button over and over. Yeah, whoever did that, you're my favorite.
Best advice for a first-time visual effects artist or people looking to get into the industry?
Practice. Experience matters most. Yeah, I talked about all that stuff with your career and your bosses and stuff. And it is important, but make no mistake, practice really is super important, and you don't need to wait to have a job to get it. I practiced a lot ahead of every job that I got by doing things that were outside my job role. Obviously, I practiced 3D before I got the Sierra gig, and I purposely flooded. There was a board that had all the Mel scripts way back in the day when Maya just got started, and I built a crap ton of Mel tools so that board would be flooded. And I did it because A, I was interested in it, but B, I knew that whenever I would go interview, people who were looking for tech artists would have probably seen my Mel scripts. That happened when I went to interview at Blizzard. So my point is, you make work. Don't wait. Get an engine. It only takes an engine to be a VFX artist, truly. That and effort, and just build stuff. Build tons of stuff. Even if you're copying at first, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Just working is the way forward.
Julian, what question do you never get asked that you wish you were asked more often?
I think I touched on it earlier with Rachel mentioned it as well. There's lots of things I could say, but I just don't get asked for feedback or help on that thing. And I said, it's not necessarily anybody's fault but my own, but I have more time to give, and I wish people would reach out and utilize it. Like I said, I enjoy the process of helping people, and I definitely enjoy the process for myself, but also for helping people understand where to go. I can remember what it's like to be in the position of having all of the passion and intention, but just not necessarily knowing how to direct your energy. And this is where more experience can help. So people who've done it. And so that's what I wish more than anything.
Awesome. Any final thoughts or things to plug? Anything you want to promote? Personal projects, I guess Diablo coming out that you've been working on.
Yeah, of course I would be remiss if I didn't. Diablo Immortal, it is where my head is at, genuinely. I don't have a side project right now. It's been very interesting to work on. I didn't think that phone or mobile games would be something that would really light me up as much as it has. But I think the mission of this particular game is what's made it work for me, which is that we want it to feel like a first-class AAA experience. We want it to feel like it's a Diablo game, we want that combat to be every bit as good as it is on any other platform. That's our goal. That's what we're trying to do there, among many other goals. But obviously that's the one that is in my area of expertise. That's my personal thing. So I don't know, so far the people who played it have been pretty surprised by how much it feels like a Diablo title and not like a mobile game. And I don't know, that's what I think is exciting about it. That's what I'm excited about.
That's awesome, man. And if people wanted to get in touch with you and just kind of pick your brain or, elaborate on anything we talked about in the podcast, where can they contact you?
I'm going to blame myself for not being very visible. I should just ask everybody, where the hell should I go? So I can be more accessible to people. But, I have a home email address. That works, julianlove@mac.com. Facebook is not a great place. I know. I dislike it too, but I am available there. LinkedIn, you can find my profile pretty easily there. I've been looking for another platform to replace Facebook as of late, but I haven't settled on anything as of yet. The VFX group used to have a lot of activity, but it doesn't these days, probably because something better came along.
Awesome. Julian, man, it has been awesome to talk with you for the past 2 hours. I really appreciate your time that you set aside to really kind of share your insight and your wisdom with us. You're a big inspiration and encouragement to everybody in the community, and we really appreciate everything you do for us.
Travis, that is very kind of you to say. This has been super fun. I obviously enjoy talking about all these things, and you asked some really fantastic questions. I got a kick out of all this. This has been great.
All right. You take it easy.
All righty. Catch you later.
Thank you so much, everybody, for listening to this amazing episode with Julian. He has so much to offer the world, and I learned a lot. I hope you learned a lot, too, from all of his visual effects tips and journey. One thing that Julian said, along with Rachel and some others, is that a lot of times they don't get approached by others and they wish they would. So if you're an artist looking for mentorship or feedback on your work or ways to improve, whether it be through visual effects or just career choices, talk to these people. They want you to talk to them. They want you to grow and be your best self. We love helping others as artists and teachers. So go out there. Talk, get involved. I am so excited for what's going on in the real-time visual effects community. This industry is thriving, and there are so many job opportunities out there. Companies are hiring for visual effects artists, so you can find work. I'm also excited to see so many of our artists move into senior roles. Every time I'm on Twitter, I see somebody updating their status, and it is so awesome to celebrate in those successes. So definitely celebrate and take joy in all the awesome stuff that we as artists are doing. Like I mentioned last time, post your work for the public to see, even if it's a work in progress. There's so much to learn and grow from each other. Guys, y'all are amazing. I'm so thankful for all the kind words that I'm constantly getting from other people. You really, really inspire me and make me a better person, and I feel the same way about each of you. Until our next episode, rock on.